Tense times often call for commander-in-chief with a healing touch. The president said he would tone it down at a rally on Saturday in Illinois. The crowd didn't like it. The same day of the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. Tonight, the president claims the media creates the impression he is divisive, making it hard to unify the nation in times like these.
They talked about Trump in the headline. Now, they didn't do that with Bernie Sanders when he had. They didn't do that with the Democrats when other people came out. They didn't do that with President Obama with the church.
We are joined now by Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume. Welcome.
Thank you, Shannon.
I was struck this morning by your tweet earlier today where you said one of the president's problems is he thinks everything is about him, but one of his critics' problems, they think so too.
Right. Well, I think that's correct. I mean, Trump is very self-absorbed. That's not a crippling quality, but he does think everything seems to revolve around him, and he sees things through that prism. So if something happens, he doesn't necessarily view it through a national prism. He views it through a prism of how it affects him and his standing and how it reflects on him. And his critics have the same issue. They're totally obsessed with him, and everything that happens they trace back to him. They can't stop thinking about him. They can't stop talking about him. And so the result is that when some of these hideous events come along, it's one thing to say that, well, maybe he had something, his inspiration had something to do with the guy who sent the pipe bombs, because that guy was a huge fan. But this guy who carried out this hideous atrocity at that synagogue was a guy who was down on Trump. So how does he get to blame both ways? It makes no sense, but that's where we are, I think.
Well, one of the people making that connection, Senator Dianne Feinstein, I mean, somebody who's been here for decades, and she knows how this all works, and she's seen this country through tragic, terrible times. She says it's difficult not to draw direct lines between the hateful, divisive rhetoric of Donald Trump and an increase in such crimes. She was detailing what we've seen over the last week, a number of very tragic events.
Well, I think that's bad analysis. I don't think you can make that connection. We don't know what was in the mind and what was the influencing factor with some of these people. I just think that's a connection you can't make. But it illustrates the obsession with him and the desire to blame him for everything. I think a lot of people on the left and in the media, do I repeat myself, considered Trump's election to be kind of a national emergency, in which it was appropriate for them to abandon the usual standards and the customs that we've observed, particularly as journalists, through time. And the old idea of neutral news coverage has kind of gone by the boards, and you see the most extraordinary level of opinion being expressed in what look like normal news stories, but turn out to be something very different indeed. And the dislike of Trump in the mainstream media is universal. These journalists can't stand the guy. They can't stand the sight of him. And I think they think they're doing some kind of public service in trying to bring him down. My own view of that is if Trump is bad news, as they think, straightforward and accurate and balanced news coverage will illustrate that. And the public is not stupid and will see that. And what they're doing, I think, has made them so distrusted by so many people now that it's counterproductive for them and it's terrible for journalism.
Well, the LA Times, under this headline today, shrugging off blame, Trump reverts to divisive rhetoric after shooting. They say this, quote, President Trump, rather than taking on the traditional task of unifying the nation after a deadly shooting rampage, reverted to his usual rhetoric Monday morning, attacking the media as the true enemy of the people and stirring up fear of immigrants. Now, there was a lot of push back and forth about this in the White House briefing today. Here is how Sarah Sanders responded to that.
Very first thing that the president did was condemn the attacks both in Pittsburgh and in the pipe bombs. The very first thing the media did was blame the president and make him responsible for these ridiculous acts. That is outrageous that would be the very first reaction of so many people across this country.
Does she make a fair point?
She does make a fair point. Look, it would be better if Donald Trump had the ability to soothe people's tempers at a time like this. I don't think that's in his skill set, and he can be criticized for that. But basically, the words he spoke in reaction to both these actions were appropriate, and particularly what he said after Pittsburgh was appropriate. And yet we hear the claim made, based on what I can't really fathom, that he's an anti-Semite. I think, you know, and a racist. I think the basis for that is very thin, and especially so in the argument that he's an anti-Semite. But this is where people go to battle stations almost automatically. His critics go to battle stations, including those in the media, immediately after things like this happen. They see things through that prism, and they respond as they do. And I think it's damaged them, and it's not helpful to the country.
Well, and it's not just the president taking blame. Dan Rather says this in a tweet: mass murder at a Pittsburgh synagogue, a killer targeting African Americans in Kentucky. That's another case that hasn't gotten as much attention. The bomb maker. The focus should not be only on Trump, but all who excuse, abet, or stand in silence while hate is stoked for political gain. So that reads to me, if you're not actively criticizing this president, you're a part of the problem as well.
Yeah, you're complicit in these crimes. And what I would say about this, out across the country, I think, you know, sensible, reasonable people looking at this who may not particularly care for Trump, but may also appreciate some of the results he seems to have gotten, they look at that and they say, that's nonsense. It's ridiculous. The person responsible is the person responsible. And you can't draw that kind of a connection reasonably. You don't know enough to do that if it were there to be drawn. So I think this kind of stuff is utterly regrettable, and it is. You look at the standing that we in the news media enjoy with the public, and it's about as low as it's ever been. And this kind of stuff is one of the reasons for that. It's just, the stuff is just not credible to people. They think it's unfair, and they think it's biased, and they're not wrong about that.
Yeah, and that only adds to the president's argument about the media for a lot of folks. Brit Hume, thank you. Always great to have your insights and expertise.